You took away my freedom. Now I will take away what you love most." These were the words of the Croc after executing a kidnapping plan against Bukele's daughter and his wife. But will he have succeeded? Stay until the end of the video and find out. Croc was the man who resonated like an echo of terror in every corner of El Salvador. The undisputed leader of the Mara, Salvatrucha 13. MS-13 was a man whose strategic cunning and cruelty had elevated him above his peers, turning him into a dark legend among Salvadoran gangs. Croc not only led, but was an architect of chaos, a strategist who understood that his power lay not only in territorial control, but also in the psychological fear he could instill in his enemies, the population, and the authorities alike. His influence extended like a shadow, encompassing entire neighborhoods where every house, every business, and even every breath was under his control. Under Croc's leadership, the MS-13 transformed into more than just a gang. It was a criminal network that combined local extortion with international drug trafficking operations. Croc had a vision that went beyond street dominance. He wanted to consolidate an empire that could rival any other criminal organization in Latin America. In the neighborhoods under his control, his rules were law. Extortion became a system as structured as government taxes, and the punishments for disobedience were brutal. Communities lived in a constant state of fear, knowing that any attempt at resistance would be ruthlessly crushed. When Nayib Bukele assumed the presidency in 2019, he did so with a clear promise to end gang dominance in El Salvador. His plan, territorial control, was an ambitious strategy that combined a militarized presence in the most affected communities with social and technological advances aimed at attacking the roots of the problem. But Croc was no common enemy. For him, Bukele was a direct challenge to his authority, a provocation he couldn't ignore. Instead of backing down, Croc decided to confront him head-on, declaring a war that became one of the country's largest security crises. Croc's response was as brutal as it was calculated. He ordered a series of coordinated attacks in various parts of El Salvador, including massacres that left dozens dead in a matter of hours. These actions not only sent a message of defiance to the government, but also sowed terror in the population, weakening confidence in the state's ability to protect them. Croc's tactics were not limited to physical violence. On social media, videos of brutal executions began to circulate, in which gang members loyal to him left explicit messages directed at Bukele, challenging only Croc, stopping them. These images, which showed the scope and organization of the MS-13, became a symbol of the psychological warfare that Croc waged against the Bukele government. Known for his direct style and masterful use of social media, Bukele turned the pursuit of Croc into a personal crusade. He publicly promised that the gang leader would be captured and brought to justice, but Croc was not an easy target. His network of contacts and his ability to evade authorities kept him out of the government's reach. For months, Croc moved between hideouts in rural and urban areas, protected by a close circle of hitmen and allies. He knew that every move could be his last, but his knowledge of the terrain and his ability to manipulate those around him kept him one step ahead of his pursuers. The hunt for Croc was an operation that involved all of El Salvador's security forces. Military and police intelligence worked tirelessly, intercepting communications and using informants to track his movements. But Croc wasn't just hiding. He also counterattacked several operations aimed at capturing him. These operations ended in ambushes where government forces suffered casualties. Croc used these tactical victories to reinforce his image of invincibility among both his followers and the communities he controlled. The turning point came when one of Croc's trusted men, captured in a raid, decided to cooperate with the authorities. This informant provided key information about Croc's hideouts and escape routes, as well as the contacts he used to stay protected. With this information, the government launched a large-scale operation, mobilizing troops of agents and soldiers to surround a farm on the outskirts of San Miguel, where Croc was believed to be taking refuge. Croc's capture was swift and decisive. At dawn, security forces stormed the property using helicopters and armored vehicles to ensure there was no escape. Croc's surprise outnumbered, he was arrested without resistance. Images of his capture, handcuffed and surrounded by soldiers, became a symbol of the government's fight against gangs. The beginning of hell and the threat of Crook. Croc's days in prison after his capture became a personal hell that not only marked the end of his reign, but also the beginning of a fall filled with systematic humiliation and punishment. Although his capture was celebrated by Nayib Bukele's government as a decisive victory in the fight against gangs, for Crook it was the beginning of a torment that only fueled his hatred for the president to the point of becoming obsessed with a single idea: revenge, and making him pay for every blow, every insult, and every deprivation he suffered within the prison walls. Croc's arrival at the CECOT maximum security prison was an event carefully choreographed by the authorities. Broadcast images of his transfer, handcuffed, surrounded by soldiers, and escorted by armored vehicles, across all media outlets and on Bukele's social media. The message was clear: Crook, the man who had defied the state, was now completely under its control. But what wasn't shown publicly was what happened once the prison doors closed behind him. From the very beginning, the guards were tasked with showing Crook that his time as the undisputed member of the MS-13 was over. They stripped him of his clothes and forced him to remain naked for hours in a cold, dark cell. This small, windowless cell became his prison within a prison, a space designed to break him both physically and psychologically. They didn't allow him to sleep for the first 48 hours, keeping him awake with bright lights and frequent knocks on the metal door. Food, when it arrived, was scarce and deliberately scarce. Disgusting. The guards made sure every bite they offered him was nearly inedible, and sometimes left him without food for days. When he asked for water, they handed him glasses of dirty liquid or simply ignored him. These deprivations were part of a carefully executed plan to strip Crook of any vestige of dignity or resilience. Physical punishment was a constant. Every day, the guards took him from his cell to a secluded area of the prison where they beat him mercilessly. They used sticks, army boots, and their bare hands to ensure that each blow left a mark. Crook, who had built his reputation on the streets as an indomitable man, tried to resist at first, but the blows were relentless, and the physical strength he had once used to command respect was now useless against the organized violence the guards unleashed upon him during these beatings. Insults rained down upon him. They called him a trash dog and coward. They reminded him that he was no one anymore, that his power had disappeared, and that now he was nothing more than a prisoner at the mercy of the state. One of the guards mockingly said to him, "Where's your army now? Crook, where are your men to save you?" These words hurt him as much as the blows. Each insult was a reminder that his life built on power and fear had completely crumbled. Crook tried to maintain his composure, but there were times when the pain and frustration were too much. In one of the most brutal punishments, the guards forced him to walk barefoot on gravel while beating him with wooden sticks. His feet bled, and every step was a torment. But it was during one of these torture sessions when Crook, exhausted and filled with hatred, screamed through his teeth, "Book, I will pay for each one of these blows. I will destroy you even if it is the last thing I do." This cry of defiance was received with laughter from the guards who beat him even harder, but his words echoed in the air, charged with a fury that couldn't be contained by the prison walls. Croc's hatred for Bukele stemmed not only from the beatings and physical humiliation, but also from the way the president used his capture as a political trophy. Every time Crook watched the news on the small prison television, he saw Bukele talking about his capture, showing images of him handcuffed and weakened. For Crook, every public appearance by Bukele was a reminder of his defeat, and every word the president spoke was like a direct mockery of him. The humiliations also had a psychological character. The guards made sure to remind him that his MS-13 gang was being dismantled piece by piece. They showed him photos of his former allies, captured and in some cases even executed in clashes with security forces. Image. It was a blow to his ego, proof that his legacy was being destroyed. "Where is your empire now, Crook?" They asked him with sarcasm, these words more than any blow They broke his spirit. In the following days, the deprivations and punishments continued. They forced him to clean the prison bathrooms, a task that the guards specifically assigned to prisoners they wanted to humiliate. They doused him with dirty water and forced him to scrub the floor with his bare hands while the other prisoners watched in silence. For someone who had been a feared and respected leader, these tasks were a way to strip him of any vestige of power or dignity. But despite all the suffering, Croc's hatred for Bukele did not diminish. On the contrary, it grew with each day he spent in prison. In his mind, he began to construct a plan for revenge. Although he was physically weakened, his mind remained sharp, and each blow he received only fueled his determination to regain control and destroy those who had humiliated him. Croc's revenge, despite the strict security measures in place, Croc Prison still maintained a delicate but effective control over some members of the MS-13 operating on the streets. His reputation and leadership had not entirely disappeared since his confinement. He had learned to communicate through codes and signals that evaded the guards' vigilance. A small group of gang members loyal to him were tasked with silently carrying out his orders, knowing that betraying him meant certain death. This was the core of his plan, a network of operators that continued to function as a shadow of his lost empire. The idea of attacking Bukele's family emerged as a symbolic act of revenge. Croc knew he couldn't directly reach the president, but he could hurt his wife and daughter. Not only would he fulfill his promise of revenge, but he would also send a chilling message to those who had betrayed him and to the authorities who believed they had defeated him. To devise a plan with the precision of a military strategist, Zelda used small gestures and codes through the few prisoners who still had access to contacts abroad. With patience and cunning, he managed to get a coded note to one of his most loyal men, known as El Rat. El Rat was an experienced gang member known for his absolute loyalty to Croc and his ability to carry out operations without leaving a trace. He received the order to intercept the car in which Bukele's wife, Gabriela Rodriguez, and his young daughter, Layla, were traveling. The message was clear. They had to hijack the vehicle, ensure that the victims were alive, and then send a public message that made it clear that Croc still had the power to challenge the president. The operation had to be swift, precise, and executed without errors. El Rat began planning the operation with a small group of trusted hitmen. He knew this attack had to be carried out with absolute discretion, but also a calculated brutality that ensured the mission's success. After weeks of surveillance, they managed to identify the routine of the official vehicle that was transporting Bukele's wife and daughter. They knew it was a difficult target, protected by bodyguards and security protocols. But they also knew there would be moments of vulnerability. The attack was scheduled for a day when the presidential family planned to attend a cultural event on the outskirts of San Salvador. On the day of the operation, a convoy of 3 vehicles led by the thug arrived and positioned themselves on a secondary road they knew the presidential car would pass. They were carrying high-caliber weapons, explosives, and a truck to block the road. In case the bodyguard tried to intervene, the operation was synchronized to the millimeter. When Bukele's wife's car appeared on the horizon, the hitmen executed the plan. The truck crossed the road. Blockading El Paso, the armed men immediately jumped out of the vehicles, firing into the air to sow panic and force the driver of the presidential car to stop. The escort reacted quickly, opening fire on the attackers. What had been planned as a clean kidnapping turned into a chaotic shootout. The well-armed and organized gunmen managed to maintain their advantage. During the first few minutes, however, the presidential escort had been trained to handle these types of situations. While gunshots echoed along the highway, Gabriela and her daughter were hastily evacuated from the vehicle to a safer area, protected by the escorts who sacrificed themselves to keep them safe. The confrontation was brutal and left several dead and wounded on both sides. Croc's gunmen managed to wound some escorts, but the attack did not go as planned. Although the presidential escort was initially outnumbered, received reinforcements within minutes. The Rat's men, aware that the operation had failed, tried to flee, but most of them was captured or killed on the spot. Among those arrested was the Rat, who, after an intense pursuit, was captured by special forces. News of the attempted kidnapping spread quickly. A furious Bukele appeared at a press conference a few hours later, condemning the attack as an act of terrorism and promising that those responsible would pay to the full extent of the law. But Bukele also knew that this attack was not an isolated action. It was a direct message from Crook, a reminder that even behind bars, the rat remained a threat. While in custody, he was interrogated for hours. Initially, he refused to talk, but authorities managed to obtain a confession. He confirmed that the operation had been ordered directly by Crook from prison. This revelation triggered a wave of outrage in the country and led the government to strengthen security measures in prisons, including the total isolation of Crook and the installation of advanced technology to block any type of crime. Meanwhile, in prison, Crook received news of the operation's failure. Although he had hoped that his plan would inspire MS-13 members, the capture of Rada and the exposure of his plan left him even more isolated, both inside and outside the prison. However, far from resigning himself, Crook became even more obsessed with the idea of taking revenge on Bukele. Bukele's anger grew from the moment he learned that the kidnapping attempt had been orchestrated by Crook. Buell ordered the punishments to be intensified. Inside the prison, he wanted to make it clear that not only the leader of the Mara Salvatrucha 13 gang would suffer the consequences, but also anyone else who dared to challenge his authority. His message was clear: prison would not be a refuge, but rather a place where terror and despair would be the only constants for those who had destroyed the country's peace in the days following the attack. CR was transferred to a cell, even smaller and more isolated within the maximum security prison. This cell, designed specifically to break the most dangerous prisoners, thrived on natural light and adequate ventilation. Humidity permeated the air, and the cold of the nights became a constant enemy. Crook was deprived of all communication with the outside world, even with other prisoners, leaving his world reduced to the four walls that surrounded him. Furthermore, the food, which was already scarce and of poor quality, became even more limited. Sometimes, the guards simply left him cloudy water and a piece of stale bread, ensuring that he didn't get enough energy to stay strong. The physical punishments also intensified each day. Crook was taken out of his cell to face long beatings in remote areas of the prison. The guards, emboldened by Bukele's orders, showed no mercy. They used sticks, military boots, and any object they had. One of the guards, while kicking him in the ribs, said, "Do you think you could touch the president's family?" Now you're going to understand what it means to mess with Bukele. Each blow was not only a way of inflicting physical pain, but also an attempt to break his spirit. One of the most humiliating moments for Crook occurred when the guards forced him to crawl on the prison floor while mocking him. They tied his hands and dragged him through the hallways, displaying him as a trophy to other prisoners. Some of them, many of them former gang rivals, laughed and shouted insults while Crook was treated like an animal. This public display was part of a calculated effort to strip him of any vestige of power or respect he might have had left among the inmates. The climax of this campaign of punishment occurred one day. In an unusual gesture for a head of state, Bukele decided to personally visit the prison. Although the visit was not publicly announced, it was a calculated act to send a message to both Crook and his followers. The president was willing to go to the very end in his fight against the gangs. Crook was taken to a special room inside the prison where he was forced to kneel before Bukele. He was visibly weakened, with bruises on his face and wounds on his body, but his gaze still reflected the hatred he felt for the man who was now in control of his destiny. Bukele, dressed in his signature casual style, walked slowly around Crook, observing him closely. Finally, he stopped in front of him and, in a cold but forceful tone, said, "You thought you could touch my family and get away with it? You think you still have power, but here, Crook, is nothing. I will make sure that you never leave these walls. I will make every day you spend here worse than the last. Your life, what's left of it, will be hell, and I will be the one who controls it." Bukele's words they resounded in the room like a bang. And although Crook didn't respond, the trembling of his body betrayed the impact Bukele's visit had had. It marked a before and after in the treatment Crook received inside the prison. From that moment on, the punishments became even crueler. The guards subjected him to long hours of standing without allowing him to sit or rest. They forced him to perform degrading tasks, such as cleaning bathrooms with his bare hands, while other prisoners watched and mocked him. They also denied him access to any type of medical attention, allowing his wounds to become infected and his health to deteriorate. The nights, which had previously been difficult, became a torment. The guards banged on the walls of his cell at random intervals to prevent him from sleeping. The insomnia, combined with the lack of food and the constant abuse, began to take its toll on Crook, the man who he had once commanded a criminal empire. Now he was a shadow of himself, a broken prisoner who only survived thanks to his hatred. That hatred directed exclusively toward Bukele. It was the only thing that kept his mind functioning. Despite everything, Crook didn't stop fantasizing. With revenge in his mind, he planned every detail of how he would make Bukele pay for what he was suffering. He visualized the moment when his men, still loyal to him, would find a way to reach the president. Although his situation was desperate, he refused to accept defeat. In his thoughts, every blow and every insult were one more reason to continue fighting, even if that fight only existed in his imagination. And so we come to the end of this video. If you liked it, I invite you to give us your like so we can continue making more videos like this. Also, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any of our new videos. I wish you a great day until the next.